Okay, we're gonna see if this works. As always, I always start that way. Like I don't know if it's going to work or not. I always start out with, well, let's see if this works. We'll get it dialed in here. Just kind of getting things kicked back off, getting the channel back up and running, and hoping for some growth here. So like and subscribe, share the content. That's a big deal in terms of getting the channel to grow. If you like what we're talking about here, I say we're as if there's a bunch of us. If you like what I'm talking about here, you want to share my content, please do so. That really helps me, helps the channel grow. Put this on your Facebook page, pin it up, whatever the case may be. It is Brian for Liberty. Um, as I mentioned yesterday, I'm here today to talk about critical race theory, and it's kicking off this. We're having all of this hate and anger and all these fights and debates and all these different things across the country. And should this be taught in our schools? Should we be teaching this to our children? And I honestly believe in my heart of hearts that the majority of the people screaming and shouting on both sides of this argument have not read the book. I really believe that. I'll give you an anecdotal piece as to why I think that. My wife, one of her coworkers, had was talking to her about a book he read about eating meat, about going vegetarian, and just couldn't stop raving about this book and trying to convince her that she should go vegetarian, how horrible eating meat is, all these different things, and on and on. And I mean, and the conversation, I'm just going to adjust this a little bit here. The conversation just went on and on and on, and eventually it came like that. This book that he was so passionate about that he was sharing with her, he hadn't actually read the book. He hadn't read the book, and it was like, what? People form these opinions about things completely absent of actually exposing themselves and really taking the time to learn about any of these things. So we get into critical race theory, and I genuinely believe, and in a way, I believe it the same way I believe that people are super passionate about different economic positions, political positions that they hold, without really having any basis for the confidence that they have that they're correct, without having studied the topic, without having looked at it. I think that's where we end up with a lot of these superficial conversations. We're not solving problems when we're talking about race and all these different things that are going on out there. We're not educating ourselves, and therefore we can't attack any actual problems because we don't have the requisite knowledge it would take to solve any of these problems. So, all that being said, I'm going to go through this book, and it's a very elementary book. So the reading is very easy. So, Critical Race Theory, Richard Delgado. This is the third edition. Gene Stefanik, Stefanchik, whatever. Those are the writers of this book. I took some notes here. I'm going to go through. I've underlined some things I want to hit on, but I want to start with this. And I posted a video on my TikTok channel page, whatever you want to, whatever the kids are calling it these days. And I want to read this to you here as well, in the introduction of this book. And pardon me, I'd have to break out the old man cheaters here. Think of events that could occur in an ordinary day. A child raises her hand repeatedly in a fourth grade class. The teacher either recognizes her or does not. A shopper hands a cashier a $5 bill to pay for a small item. The clerk either smiles, makes small talk, and deposits change in the shopper's hand or does not. A woman goes to a new car lot ready to buy. Salespeople stand about talking to each other or all converge trying to help her. A jogger in a park gives a brief acknowledgement to an approaching walker. The walker returns the greeting or walks by silently. Now, this is interesting here. Sometimes actions like these stem from mere rudeness or indifference. And then it goes on to explain, this person was in a hurry, somebody was lost in thought, whatever the case may be. But at other times, race seems to play a part. And when it does, social scientists call the event a microaggression. Listen to that sentence again. But at other times, race seems to play a part. When? When does race play a part? When can we know the heart of another person and say, yes, this happened because of racism. Racism is what caused this to happen. How do you know? There is nothing in that expression that says this is how you know when it's racism. There's nothing that does that for you in this little passage. The reason that this is important, and the reason that I open with this, is because this is a book we're going to be using. This is the guideline we're going to be using to teach children. We're going to teach critical race theory to young children of color. What is the takeaway from that? The takeaway from that is going to be that every negative encounter you have is based on racism. That's the takeaway. And that's an important thing to keep in mind, because you are setting these children up for failure. You're doing the opposite of helping them. You are setting them up for failure. These kids are not going to go on to be successful. They're not going to go on to have good relationships with their fellow man. They are going to grow up jaded and cynical and angry at the world around them. And you're embedding this into their minds at a very early age. That passage, that statement, that has nothing to do with history. That's the other argument we are constantly hearing when it comes to teaching critical race theory, is that we don't want to teach America's history. We don't want to teach the racist history of the United States. What does that have to do with history? What that I just read has anything to do with history? Nothing. This is creating a perception of racism around people. That's all it's doing. And that is incredibly dangerous. Like, incredibly dangerous. And that is not setting young people of color in particular, up for success in the long run. And it has nothing to do with teaching history. And to that argument, which is one of the more common arguments you hear, to me is one of the worst arguments, because we all learned we all learned about slavery. We all learned about what happened to the Native Americans. We all learned about all of that stuff. Jim Crow, segregation. This is not a secret. It's not, nobody's whispering in the back rooms about how racist America used to be. It's front and center. It's in front of you all the time. It's not a secret that we have a horrible racist past. But so does the world. The world has a horrible racist past. That's another issue I have with critical race theory. We can get into that as we go through the chapters of this book and future shows that I'll do. But it really, really tries to narrow down racism, slavery, all of these issues, and make it as if it is solely an issue, a white-black issue, that it's solely a Western culture issue. And that's obviously incorrect. It's obviously not true. The slavery, racism, all of these things have existed as long as humanity has existed. We've found ways to chop each other up into little groups and treat each other poorly for as long as we've existed. And painting this as a purely white-black issue, painting this purely as an American issue, really misses a valuable opportunity in teaching us that action, the act of dividing people up over these arbitrary things, race, ethnicity, gender, chopping up humanity into these little arbitrary groups and treating them differently, has typically led to horrible outcomes. That's the thing that critical race theory, if we're going to talk about racism and the history of racism, that's the lesson that we should be teaching children, is that doing this action, we're going to divide up society into these little groups. That's the dangerous thing. That's the bad thing. And that it doesn't matter what group is doing what to whom. It always starts with the ability to divide. That's where it starts. And that's all this is. That's all this critical race theory. That's all this is. It's just further division. And like I said, the outcomes of this are always going to be negative. So we go on into this chapter. So that introduction right there, as I'm reading this book, the introduction right there set me off. It was already going to be a lot of work for me at this point to take this book and to try and read through it and take the rest of what they had to say with an open mind. I think I did my best. I knew where I was going to land on this kind of before I even started reading it, but I tried. I did my best. But let me read this little. So what is critical race theory? The critical race theory movement is a collection of activists and scholars engaged in studying and transforming the relationship among race, racism, and power. I underline that as my next thing, because this is important when it comes to racism and race relations in the United States. There are a group of people in this country who literally make their living off the perpetuation of off of perpetuating racism, of keeping that alive, keeping that division alive. When you talk about activists and scholars, you're talking about professors who teach this and activists who literally don't do anything but talk about it. That's their whole way of life. I've said this before, and I stand by it 100%. This all started. Racism in this country didn't get better. It got significantly worse. It became this issue that we have now after the election of Barack Obama. And I do not blame Barack Obama for it. I don't believe it was he caused it. I don't think this was an issue or something that he created. What I do think, or what I know, is that when Barack Obama was elected president, a lot of people were starting to celebrate a post-racial America, an America that had finally moved beyond its racist history and evolved into a country that elected a black man, not just Fred Jackson either, a black man named Barack Hussein Obama. Our country elected that man twice. And I think what happened was, or what I know happened, what I remember is you couldn't get, the race baiters could not get out in front of this thing fast enough. They had to get out there. They had to get in front of it because they were all about, Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton were about to have to go get real jobs. That's the problem. That's what happened. And these people, these academics, these activists, these scholars had to make sure that the fires of racism continued to burn, or they were going to lose the goose that laid the golden egg. And they did this to the absolute detriment of their own people in front of me. So I'm going to butcher the quote, or I'll have to paraphrase anyway, that these leaders will do this to the detriment of their own people. He literally says it in his book, Basic Economics. They're lining their own pockets at the expense of their own people, the people they're sworn to or have made a pledge to help. So that's the problem with critical race theory. If you look at who's behind it, just start there. This isn't some grassroots movement that started in the streets. This started in the halls of education. This started in the halls of education and with activists. That is what is going on here. Now I'm having some issues here on the stream, so hopefully it keeps rolling here, but let's see here. I don't know what's going on. I'm dropping out, apparently. Don't know what the problem is, but we're having troubles. Anyway, I'm going to keep going, and I'm going to hope that I'm just going to kind of hope that the stream keeps working, I guess. Anyway, where was I? So we got to think about where this started. And this starts with academics. It starts with activists. It starts with people who are literally in their own world, where they have to keep this going because this is how they make their living. This is how they put food on the table. Next. All right. So we start with the genesis. Where did this start? Where did it come from? Who created it? And what ulterior motive could potentially be behind this? And it goes again, early origins here, page 4 of the introduction, 1970s, which obviously before, and when it was probably very necessary in the 1970s. We had to analyze race relations in the 1970s. We did have significant issues at that point. And so, yeah, of course, we wanted to make sure that we were examining this. And as we came out of the segregation era, as we came out of these things, that we were able to make sure that this transition and the Civil Rights Act, and that these things were being applied intelligently. And yeah, that makes perfect sense. But again, it comes from lawyers, activists, and legal scholars. It's not a grassroots movement. This isn't Rosa Parks. These are people in positions of power and privilege who started this. And you can't help but think that a portion of this had to be related to keeping themselves employed. So that's problem number one. You always have to look at, whenever there's an issue like this, you do in fact have to look beyond just the messaging and what could potentially be the motive behind the actual movement itself. I mean, look at Black Lives Matter. I'm sorry. The people who organized this, people who started this, people at the very top of that are wealthy people living in mansions now. What are they doing? Have they gone out there and done something to help the community? It doesn't seem like it. So, anyway, I get a little. So, another point that gets made here, and this is interesting to me. Still in the introduction, no person has a single, easily stated unitary identity. This is interesting to me. This is where this whole leftist ideologies will start to come apart. You see it with people. They will eventually start eating their own, is what we call it. They turn on each other. You saw it with Dave Chappelle, right? You saw the left, portions of the left turn on Dave Chappelle at one point, right? And so why does that happen? Well, because there's a victim hierarchy here. And what they're going to find out is this statement here that no person has a single, easily stated unitary identity. And it goes on to say a white feminist may also be Jewish or working class or a single mother. An African-American activist may be male or female, gay or straight. A Latino may be a Democrat, a Republican, or even black. They're touching on a truth here that's important and that actually matters. And that truth is that we're all just freaking individuals. The very idea of critical race theory is destroyed right there early on in critical race theory. We're all just individual people. You cannot look at somebody and assume anything about them based on anything physically that you could see. A person's race doesn't express their beliefs. A person's ethnicity doesn't express their beliefs. A person's gender, a person's sex. These things don't tell you anything about who that person is as an individual. So the focus on race is silly, and the book itself is self-defeating in that way because it tries to it gets into intersectionalism, and we're going to break people down into these tinier and tinier groups, and eventually what you're going to find is that the libertarians were right all along. The smallest minority is the individual, and as long as we're protecting individual rights across the board and everybody's playing by the same rules, then we're okay. So anyway, like I said, it breaks down all these different types of people, white feminists, Jewish single mothers, all these different things trying to be stereotypical and trying to break stereotypes. And it's just interesting because it is a self-defeating argument within the book itself. So it talks about subtler forms of racism, but it doesn't go on to identify what those subtle forms of racism actually are. So what does that mean? That is code. That is a way of saying that any perceived slight, any perceived negative outcome, any perceived disadvantage can be based on race. We're going to tie all that back to race, and it forces that. It pounds you over the head with that like a hammer, and it's all about race. Another passage in this book, and I can't seem to find it now. I had it bookmarked intentionally for this stream, but it talked about the patriarchy, which drives me nuts. Oh, here we go. Largely invisible collection of patterns and habits that make up patriarchy and other types of domination. There's a way of using language that I hate, that drives me crazy, because what they're doing is they're simply saying that this is an absolute fact. The patriarchy is an absolute fact, which in and of itself is incredibly debatable. I don't agree that it exists personally. I think there's male dominance in some areas of society. I think there's female dominance in other areas of society, but it just states patriarchy as a fact, as a form of dominance. And I think that's incorrect. So as I break down, this is just the introduction. This is kind of the chapter 1 bit. I wanted to just hit on that a little bit and kind of point out some of the flaws and weaknesses in the book itself. So I'll be back tomorrow with chapter 2. past the introduction, we'll get into the next chapter and really start digging into kind of the logic and unwinding some of the things that they think. I am sorry about the difficulties with the live stream. I like to do these things live, but if I keep having these problems, I might have to just start pre-recording these and uploading them so that they're edited and they're a little bit cleaner. So I may look into that. Again, I am sorry about the poor quality if this stopped and started, it looked like, but again, I'll take a look at that, see if it's going to be more conducive to just upload these at pre-recording them and uploading them, but I do like to do them live. Anyway, we'll see you guys tomorrow. Thanks for stopping by. Again, like, share, subscribe. I promise I'm going to get smoother and better at this. I'm going to keep working to be a better content creator, and hopefully bring you something of value that maybe a different perspective than what you're already hearing out there. Thanks a bunch, and